Good afternoon. Hello, I'm Geneva Murphy. I am Branch Chief of Domestic Relations Branch of the Superior Court of the District of Columbia. And I have the honor and the privilege of introducing two presenters today, Ms. Deb Morris and Ms. Susan Love. Ms. Morris has been the Human Resource Manager with the 4th Judicial District Court in Minneapolis since 2008 and has worked in the judicial branch since 1998. She has held various positions in district court administration and human resources. She is certified to facilitate inside-out coaching, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Leading at the Speed of Trust, and MBTI, and is a certified Center for Creative Leadership benchmark facilitator. She has also led classes in mentoring, performance management, and customer service. Ms. Morris holds a Bachelor's of Arts degree in psychology from the University of Minnesota. Ms. Susan Love. Ms. Love is the Judicial Education and Development Manager with the 4th Judicial District Court in Minneapolis, Minnesota. She has 16 years of supervisory and management experience in the court system, working for the County Attorney Office, Public Defender's Office, and the court. Since joining the 4th Judicial District Court in 2001, she has managed civil filings, housing court, probate and mental health court, the hearing office, and the traffic violations bureau. She has served as the Minnesota Association of Court Management Education Chair for 2 years and President for 4 years, and is certified to facilitate Leading at the Speed of Trust, Working at the Speed of Trust, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and MBTI. She is also a certified Center for Creative Leadership benchmark facilitator. She has led classes in the Thomas Kilman Conflict Mode Instrument, Court Ethics, and Balanced Performance Management. Ms. Love has a bachelor's degree in organizational leadership from Bethel University, where she graduated with honors, and attended the Minnesota School of Business for Legal Office Administration. Friends, it's a privilege and an honor to join to this podium Ms. Deb Morris and Ms. Susan Love. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Deb Morse, just to make sure this is Susan. Today we're going to talk about Leading at the Speed of Trust and how we came to the conclusion that we needed to bring this program to our court in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I think Stephen Covey laid it out really well this morning. He gave a very good background of what trust is and how important it is in an organization. And then he also went through the waves of trust, going from self-trust, relationship trust, organizational trust, market, and societal, and we'll talk about all of those pieces briefly today, but we wanted to tell you more about the background of how we got to the point where we wanted to use Leading at the Speed of Trust. So just to make sure everybody's on the same page of what the definition of trust that Susan and I will be using today is, it's up on the screen. It's confidence born of the character and competence of a person or an organization. And we're going to be talking both about you as a leader, your own personal trust, and then the trust of the organization as well today. So in order to be trusted, one must understand that the basis of positive human interactions is trust. And I think Stephen did a really, really nice job about talking about trust this morning and how it has to come from within. It has to be genuine. It's not something you can force. And if you extend trust, it's often reciprocated. So if an individual leader is not trusted, it's very hard for that leader to move the organization forward by themselves or through their team or through other leaders or colleagues as well. So it requires a paradigm shift for some people to really understand what trust is, and they have to look at themselves first before they can start moving forward with relationships. So Stephen talked about counterfeits this morning. Sometimes you think you're doing the right thing, but it's really just lip service, and counterfeits can last for a little while until you get to a point in a relationship, or I think he was really right when saying an attorney can be trusted and he can get to a solution, but oftentimes if you're not trusted, you might get to a solution once, but it's going to be hard to sustain a relationship. So this is our agenda for today. We're going to be talking about some of the symptoms we needed to address in our court and how we, again, came to the point of leading at the speed of trust. And our objectives were to build a stronger culture of trust, to improve performance management practices, increase the leader credibility throughout administration at all levels, enhance employee teamwork, productivity, and accountability, and to also strengthen our public trust and accountability out in our community. With our implementation, it really started with conversations in management. What were the symptoms? What did we want to achieve? Then we did trainings, and Susan will talk more about what trainings were selected and how we went through that process. And then we continue with conversations. So it's not something we started, went through a program, and ended. We still continue this day to have conversations about trust and performance and accountability. And towards the end of the program today, Susan will talk more about how we keep the language of trust and the behaviors of trust alive in our court. So about 5 years ago, our supervisors and managers were asking administration for more tools on how to do performance management well. We had all different levels and different types of experience of supervisors and managers. Some were new supervisors, some were really experienced supervisors, but it was very obvious that there were a lot of different levels of competence in the performance management processes. So they were asking us for, in administration and HR and our education department, for some more tools. Also, we knew that new technology was coming up. And this was about 5 years ago. We knew e-filing was coming. We knew document imaging was coming. We knew e-charging was coming. So we knew that we had to get staff to a point where that they were going to be comfortable with change. So our supervisors had to become change agents. And also because of budget constraints, we were not able to fill all of the positions that we had on the book. So we're down quite a few positions than we were 5 years ago. So people were being asked to do more with less. Also with budget constraints, we haven't had raises, and our employees were not excited about that, obviously. So we needed to make sure that they were motivated to do more with less. Also, there were some really long tenured employees that were pretty complacent in their jobs, and they were marginal at best. So we needed to figure out how to address their performance, become very clear with expectations, and motivate them to be engaged in all of the changes that were up and coming. So this, again, required helping supervisors and managers develop quite a few skills and working together as colleagues to move the organization forward. So these are some of the symptoms that we were looking for that we needed to address. So poor manager-supervisor performance management practices in some situations. We also had some really good supervisors and managers with some great experience. We had some employees wasting time, so lack of productivity. The strained collegial and stakeholder relationships, just working with the county attorney's office and the public defender's office, who were also strained with resources, so trying to figure out how to work best together. Lots of office gossip, lack of collegiality, poor attitudes that were poisoning some entire teams, and then absenteeism, stress, and some really good workers were starting to check out. So I know these are some symptoms that were occurring in our courts, and you can see that people weren't fully engaged, and there was some lack of trust in the organization, possibly because they saw that we weren't filling all the positions, or we were expecting more of them. We were implementing technology. So there are a lot of underlying causes for these. So I want you to work at your tables now. Let's talk amongst yourselves and try to think of ways where low trust and some issues of maybe lack of competence of a leader or lack of credibility of a leader or maybe some processes in your court could lead to some low trust symptoms. Then in about 5 minutes, I'll ask you to share some of those examples with the group about how low trust is showing up in your court. Okay, Susan's walking around with a microphone, and she's going to stop at individual tables and ask for some of your examples of where low trust showed up. We don't have flip chart paper, so I'm just going to be typing up some of the examples that you share today. So Susan, do you want to find an example?
Do you have an example you want to share? Excellent, thank you. First, your name and where you're from.
I'm Lisa Goodner, and I'm from here in Florida. We've been talking about how the budget conditions, our table, we're from Florida and from California, and how the budget conditions and the impact on the workforce is a real problem in creating trust, because people are anxious about layoffs. They are worried about what they don't know that management might know. They're worried about exercises they've been asked to go through that measure their work performance, and that's creating low trust and morale problems in the organizations.
So it sounds like there's some transparency that the employees may be looking for that's tough to give them when you're having budget struggles and things of that nature, layoffs especially. Thank you.
Yep, Mary Quinlan from the 15th Judicial Circuit in Florida. We basically said the exact same thing, that the budget constraints have really made it difficult, and staff definitely, I think, have felt a lack of transparency and unawareness of what we also have a website, actually, that you can go and look at people's salaries online. It's public knowledge. So that's created a lot of problems, because staff will go on there and they'll see someone's making more money than they make, and they have questions about that. So that's created another problem of trust.
It's a little like what Stephen M.R. Covey talked about, with sometimes too much transparency can end up being a blind spot and creating problems in an organization. Thank you. Middle table? Do you have something you'd be willing to share?
Pretty much what
Okay. So they discussed also budget issues and struggles across the courts with regard to possibly layoffs. Back table. So your name and where you're from.
Marcy Jamisco from Lake County, Illinois. We talked about some of these issues, particularly transparency, but we also talked about the role the judges play in all this, and some of the tensions that come up between the staff and the judges, and how sometimes staff or management knows to keep things confidential, but the judges might not, and they might tell staff, and then staff gets mad at management for not telling them, and some of those issues.
Great example. And how difficult is it to control what judges say when they're involved in some of these planning processes? Back. Okay. This table? Wonderful. So your name and where you're from and your example?
I'm Heidi Baker. I'm from Iowa, and we just discussed managers kind of getting stuck in that maintaining the status quo, not being willing to take risks. And I kind of put it into perspective of even being able to come here. My boss had to advocate for me to be able to come here and for that money to be spent in education, and it was definitely a risk. So.
Yeah, I think we can all connect with that and that risk of attending a conference in Orlando in the middle of July and being gone a week. And I know in Minnesota we deal a lot with, what if the media gets a hold of this? What if they find out? What will that do to the public's trust and confidence in our organization?
Pranay. Oh, that was too loud. I work with 20th Circuit Court and 58th District Court in Michigan. One of the issues that over there we were having was low confidence in solving a fingerprinting issue, where the 3 sections in the lien wasn't getting constructed. So, and it was completely lack of trust between the three parties, the prosecuting attorney, the sheriff department, and the court, primarily because they tried to solve the issue and then they failed. So the confidence level was very low. And what it came down to was to build trust to solve that issue.
And that can be one of the biggest challenges, is really establishing a trusting relationship with the court stakeholders, because without that trust, almost nothing can be successfully achieved. Does your table have anything you'd like to share?
Natalie Bird from D.C. Superior Court. I think most of whatever has been said sort of like compound where we are from and some of the problems that we have endured as a result, especially with the budget constraints. And I think what we have there is a lack of communication from managers to give us a hint as to what is going on, whether or not we're going to be furloughed, laid off, or whatever. So it's a big question.
Wonderful examples, everyone. Did I get everyone's examples? Does anybody have anything else you'd like to share that we can add to our list of symptoms of low trust in the court? All right, Deb.
So I'd say the budget is something that we really are struggling with too. We're entering into a wage reopener with one of our unions, and I was talking to Susan today, struggling during Stephen's presentation about how transparent should you be, what are the motives, what's the intent on both sides. So say there is a little bit of money, how is it going to be negotiated that it's given? And just different philosophies about that. And negotiations are very hard. I know that in our court we've built up some really good relationships with our unions, and I think that's really helped us progress a long ways. But yet in our district we're part of an overall state. There are 10 districts in our state that are covered by the same contract, and maybe our district's philosophy about how we work with the union isn't the same as another district's way they work with the union, but I feel that trust has really helped us move forward with the union, at least in our district. So I'm appreciative of that. So we've identified some symptoms of low trust, and I think acknowledging those symptoms is the first step in trying to fix anything. And when Stephen was talking this morning, he talked about the 5 waves of trust, and on the outside there's the societal wave of trust, and that's really where you start seeing your symptoms. So once you identify the symptoms, then you have to work back towards the middle to try to identify where do you begin? Where do you start solving these solutions? So administration has had a lot of conversations about, so these are our symptoms, what are our solutions? So we worked quite hard on figuring out where we wanted to start, what solutions did we want to achieve. So I've listed up some of the solutions that we were trying to get to. Increasing employee productivity and ownership of delivering results. Again, a lot of our processes are changing because of different technologies, and with e-filing that's really throwing everybody's toss the fruit basket up or whatever you say. People are having to work very different than they had to work 5 years ago. Managers and supervisors have to set the bar higher for people that they want to bring into the organization. So it's not just hiring somebody because they might have the right skill and we won't have to spend as much time training them. We're really trying to raise the bar and bring in somebody that has the same values, the same philosophy, that has a really good core before we bring them into the organization. Addressing difficult issues, getting managers and supervisors to talk about some of those performance issues and not staying with the status quo, taking some risks if it's going to be beneficial down the road. We might have to go through some hardship, but overall, in the long run, we're going to be at a better place. We've done a lot with performance management, not just letting people slide by anymore. We're really expecting a lot more out of them, and we're being clear about results. And improving accountability. Over the last 5 years, I'd say we've managed more people out of the organization than we have in a long time, because we can't afford to have people, again, just skirting by with mediocre performance. So to plan out in our court how to get to where we needed to be, we hired a performance management consultant. We were lucky enough to have somebody come in and work with us that had been working with some more public sector organizations in the Twin Cities. And what he really emphasized is we had to build a very strong foundation within our administration before we could start moving forward. We had to be really firm on what our mission, vision, and values were before we could start training or changing processes or procedures. Otherwise, it would look false, and we might fall right back into old practices. So we had a mission and a vision statement in our court, and we haven't changed those, but we kept them at the forefront on anything that we were going to implement going forward. And with the values, our administration had been talking about a values statement for quite some time. There were starts and there were stops. And our administrator is very strong, and he's very supportive of administration, and he felt the time was right to institute what are our 5 core values. And while the judges aren't the audience, they've been very supportive of what our values are. And there's a copy of the values in your packet, and it looks like this. There are 5 values. And when we implemented the 5 values in our court, our 3 top court administrators went to every staff meeting in every division, and they talked about why we're implementing the values, what they mean to the court, and why they're so important. And the staff got to talk about what they were going through at that time and what they felt about the values too, which was very good to have that conversation back and forth. Then we needed to talk to supervisors and managers more about position descriptions, and everybody that's ever hired in a government job has a job description. And a lot of it is other duties as required. So we wanted to be very clear that supervisors and managers had to be clear with their employees about what was expected. Because if an employee is not clear about what their job is and what their expectations are, they don't really know what they're working towards or working up to. So we've helped the supervisors and managers implement some tools where they meet regularly with their staff to talk about the job, to talk about the measurements, how many cases should you be entering, what's our error rate, how do you successfully handle a customer interaction. So there's been a lot more dialogue back and forth between supervisors and employees. And then finally, performance reviews. We've been doing a lot of work with getting supervisors and managers to understand what a good performance review looks like and how valuable it is, not just to the employee, but to the organization as a whole. And Susan's going to talk more about performance reviews and some of those building blocks we went through to get supervisors and managers on the same level.
Thanks, Deb. As Deb mentioned, we did have to start out with core values because we had a lot of confusion amongst our employees about what was the most important thing for them to be working on. And we had a lot of employees who said, you know what, you hired me to clerk a courtroom, or you hired me to enter cases into our case management system, or you hired me to work at the front counter and take in fines on citations. But I'm not being paid to be nice to my colleague, or I'm not being paid to be best friends with the people on my team. I don't like them, and you're not going to be able to change that. Well, really, that's one of the symptoms of low trust in our court, having employees believe and have the paradigm of, I don't need to get along with the people that I work with. And so we did a little research, and in the book Built to Last, I really loved this quote, and it really started us off on the right track with nailing down our core values. The healthiest organizations identify a small set of values that are particularly fundamental to their culture and adhere to those values without exception. It is not that they reject all other values, but rather they know which qualities lie at the heart of who they are. This knowledge makes decision-making easier and gives employees, customers, and stakeholders an accurate picture of what the organization represents. And so as you're looking at our core values, you'll see that one of our core values is relationships. We value relationships, building healthy relationships with our customers, stakeholders, and employees for commitment, quality, and results. And really, in listening to Stephen M. Covey this morning, aren't relationships, in addition to self-trust, the core of how you build trust in an organization? So once we eliminated all confusion about what our core values were as an organization. We were able to start holding employees accountable to maintaining and building healthy relationships with not only their colleagues and their managers and supervisors and our judges, but also in building healthy relationships with each other as team members. So that was really important as we looked at performance management. Now, as Deb said, we did a lot of work with a performance management consultant, and some of that work revolved around building a peer review process. So now when supervisors are writing employees' annual performance reviews, they're not only asking the individual for feedback on how do you believe you did this year, they're sending out an email or a form to the employees' team members and saying, how do you believe Susan did this year? What are your interactions in working with her? If Susan needed to improve on anything this year, what would that be? And then the manager supervisor has feedback on how that employee's relationships are with their colleagues, because my manager supervisor is not with me watching me work every day, but my colleagues sure are. So that created some accountability, but also getting feedback on what I'm doing well and what my developmental needs are. In addition to that, we provided all of our supervisors and managers with training on how to be effective performance managers and coaches. So the inside-out coaching model, leading at the speed of trust, the 7 habits of highly effective people. We provided the supervisors and managers with tools on how to effectively manage people so that they could manage people effectively and so that we could hold them accountable to those expectations. So no longer can supervisors and managers say, I don't know how to deal with this. Well, we've provided you with the tools to deal with this in the coaching. And then performance calibration. We get managers and supervisors who manage like employees, so court operations supervisors who manage employees at the line staff level together at least once a year in a large room. And we go through ratings that they've given to their employees along with the language that they've written on those reviews. And we talk about, is this rating matching up with what the individual has written about this employee? If yes, wonderful. If not, why not? And that's really created a lot of support amongst supervisors and managers for holding tough discussions with employees, talking straight with employees when there are performance issues, and really making sure that we're measuring employee performance consistently across the entire organization. So that was one of the building blocks. The next building block was developing and implementing and improving technology. I think we're all about that in the courts, and Deb talked a little about that with regard to e-filing, document imaging, et cetera. Because we can't fill positions, we have to work smarter and faster and more effectively, so we need to provide our employees with the tools to do that. The optimization and stabilization of fiscal resources. We have a senior management team who gets together and meets regularly once a month to talk about what money is not being used in my division, what vacancies do I have open, and how are we going to use that excess money towards the end of the fiscal year effectively as an organization. And that really eliminated a lot of silos. Innovative staffing solutions. We'll talk about that in a little while, but we implemented a results-only work environment in our court. And again, we're going to address that in a little bit. And then continuing education for court leaders. So all of the classes you see in your handout and on the screen here are mandatory if you manage or supervise employees in our court. And that's 7 habits of highly effective people, leading at the speed of trust, inside-out coaching, strength finders, and strengths on overdrive, Kolb learning styles, which really helps managers and supervisors identify what are the learning styles of not only myself but my employees so that I can match them successfully to the job duties that they've been assigned. The Myers-Briggs personality assessment and emotional intelligence. So, as I said, where to start? We thought that training was going to be the big lever of organizational change in our court, and we can't expect people to act differently or to change unless we've provided them with the training and the expectations on where we want them to head as an organization. So what Steve and MR didn't talk about today is part of Leading at the Speed of Trust. It's a 2-day course that managers and supervisors take. Along with that, there's a trust quotient report, and we've provided you with an example of what that report looks like. So prior to taking the course, all the supervisors and managers go into the Franklin Covey website. They complete their name, where they're from, etc., and that's all done by a facilitator who lines that up for you. And then they send out a survey to all of their direct reports, their direct supervisor and manager, stakeholders that they work with on a regular basis, and they give these individuals a couple of weeks to complete the trust quotient report for them. So during the first day of class or a week before the class, you receive your report that really lets you know, it kind of gives you a temperature gauge on what your effectiveness is as a manager and supervisor in the eyes of yourself, of your direct manager, supervisor, and of your direct reports and stakeholders. So as you go through this 2-day course, we really tap into self-trust. And what is your level of self-trust, and how do others perceive your level of trust with them through the trust quotient report? What is your relationship trust with others, et cetera, et cetera? It's a really valuable tool that helps people not only identify what their strengths are, but possibly what blind spots they may have. And let's see, sorry. The Emerging Leaders Network. One of the quotes that Stephen said today really caught me. It was like, that is so right on. When you approach management and supervisor from a level of distrust, saying, I don't know if we should train everyone. Training is a huge financial investment. Buying these materials, certifying facilitators to teach this, that's a huge investment. What if we train them and turn them into phenomenal leaders and they leave the courts? And then Stephen said, yes, but what if we don't train them and they stay? It really does demonstrate why training is a huge organizational change lever. And what we found is we are investing a lot of money in training our leaders and our supervisors and our up-and-coming leaders, but there's been big dividends and payoffs. We track the promotional level of people who have gone through our Emerging Leaders Network, and people are getting promoted right and left, and they're staying in the organization because the organization has invested in them. They're wanting to pay that investment back. And so we've provided a copy of our Emerging Leaders Network brochure in your handouts as well. It's a 12-month program that we put up-and-coming leaders through, and they complete all of the same courses that we're requiring our managers and supervisors to complete in hopes that we're preparing them one day to step in and be our future leaders. And then we have Working at the Speed of Trust, and again, we provided you with a handout on that. Working at the Speed of Trust is really for teams, and we've brought a lot of teams in crisis in our courts through this training. And it's really teaching them the 13 behaviors at a line staff level. So once you bring your leaders through Leading at the Speed of Trust, you bring your teams through Working at the Speed of Trust, and everybody is speaking the same language and has the same expectations for behavior and performance. So we talked about the 13 behaviors of high trust leaders today, and we're not going to go through each and every one of these because Stephen really did a great job of summarizing those cards for us. But what we would like to ask for you at each of your tables is to discuss the 2 behavior cards, talk straight, and create transparency. And some of the symptoms you listed earlier in the class today go towards what if our organization or our court worked more on these 2 concepts of talking straight and creating transparency. What kind of changes would we realize in our organization? So take a few minutes, review those 2 cards, cards 1 and 3, and then we'd like to go around the room and ask your table for examples. If you were going to create more transparency possibly in the budget process, what would that look like? What would you have to do in your court? I've put the examples that you shared with me here back up on the screen. Symptoms of low trust in your court. Does anybody have an example you'd be willing to share about how you would use cards 1 and 3? All right, we have a volunteer right away here. Wonderful. So your name and where you're from.
Okay. My name is Colleen Riley, and I'm with the Clerk of Court's office here in Orange County in Orlando. And what we started doing was publishing the minutes from our senior staff meetings within 24 hours of the meeting, and made those available to all employees. And what we found, I was surprised, is that people actually were looking at them. So much so that if it got to be noon the following day and they still weren't posted, I'd get a call and say, did you forget? Where are they? And then one of my colleagues here asked if I'd actually get input, like, had you thought about this? And they did. So I think after they got used to it, they sort of trusted that, hey, I can be part of the conversation too.
So that really created a lot of transparency with regard to the conversations that were happening at the senior manager level. So instead of employees approaching that with suspicion, wondering what's going on behind closed doors, now they're more familiar and comfortable with the conversations that are occurring and may even have input they could share with the senior managers that might help the organization along. Great, great. Does anybody else have another example that you'd like to share? Because I really feel like we learn from each other's examples. Anybody? All right, another volunteer. Wonderful. Thank you.
We publish our managers' meetings minutes too, just as I think that's a really good practice and employees do read them. But the other practice we've put in place is at the beginning, sometime right before or at the beginning of the legislative session in Florida every year, we hold a town hall meeting with all of our employees, and they're all invited to come, and we do it in the big courtroom. And myself and other people who are involved in the legislative session tell them what we think they should expect, what we know about what's going to happen, and also what we don't know, because often they think that we're not telling them everything, and it helps to just say we don't know what's going to happen with your benefits. We don't know. We don't know whether they're considering another pay cut. We just tell them those things and tell them that we will let them know when we do know. And those town hall meetings have been very popular with our employees.
Thank you. Wonderful example. There's nothing like hearing directly from leaders where the organization stands, what their thoughts are, what challenges they're facing. I think even if you're able to tell employees we don't have any information at this time, but this is where we're headed or this is where we think we're headed, that it reassures them and everybody can breathe a collective sigh of relief. Thank you. Does anybody else have an example you'd like to share about creating transparency or talking straight? Oh, good.
Lynn Malloy from Baton Rouge City Court in Louisiana. We do publish our manager minutes as well. And one thing we started doing about 3 years ago is an annual State of the Court address where we get all the staff together and we discuss what we've done for the year, what we're going to do for the year, what our initiatives are. And another thing we do is try to involve our staff more in things so that they have some buy-in and understand what we're doing, that we're not us against them. So we used them to put together a strategic plan for our court, and we started that with an event we called Meet Me at the Wall, where we had them all come and we identified some categories of things that we were wanting to do, and they would give us ideas, and we put teams together that involved frontline employees in addition to managers, and then they are involved in working our strategic plans. So I think it's increased the trust between the management, administration, and our staff because they're involved and we trust their involvement and they trust us a little bit more. We had a big
morale problem a few years ago, and we're gradually over the last few years increasing that, but it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort and working with the staff, and I think we're on our path to increasing that morale among our staff.
Wonderful. Great example of talking straight, creating transparency, and then really involving employees in the change process of an organization. So part of the tools that are provided in the Leading at the Speed of Trust course, a 2-day course managers and supervisors attend, is called the Trust Action Plan. And we've given you all one of these examples in your handouts today. And this really provides kind of a framework for how to use the Trust Action cards. So as you're looking at this Trust Action Plan, it says use this tool individually or with groups to decide what action to take to build trust in any given situation. So we've talked about a lot of low trust situations here, organizational examples like budget problems, employees not really trusting management when it comes to what's going on behind closed doors. But if you think about a current situation that you're dealing with individually as a leader, this card asks you to describe the current situation clearly and factually, the desired outcome, what your outcome would be, if possible, as specifically as you can, and then putting together an action plan, identifying key actions you would take to close the gap between the situation and the outcome, using the trust cards on the key as the back, on the back as a key. So if you flip this sheet over, it really gives you kind of a diagnosis of what trust cards you can use in a situation you may be facing, where maybe you don't trust your manager, your supervisor, a colleague or a coworker has let you down, customers have let you down, there's bad publicity about the court, you feel misunderstood as a leader, you need to delegate a task to someone and there's not an easy answer on who to delegate or how to delegate that task. So if you just take a few minutes to review that, if you could write down a current situation you're facing as an individual leader of the court, we're not going to ask you to share this is your private work, and then go towards your desired outcome and what action plan you would put into place using the trust action cards. All right, it looks like almost everybody is done. So the next slide, we were going to talk a lot about relationship trust, but Stephen really did a great job of going through relationship trust and the importance of building that trust with the staff we lead, with our colleagues and stakeholders. So we're not going to discuss this slide in detail, but one thing we really do want to reiterate is, are we leaving people with a manager that they can trust? When you think about your individual relationships with the employees you lead, do you give them a manager they can trust? That's starting with yourself and working outwards. And then are we providing our community and our stakeholders with an organization they can trust? Because that starts with building relationships, effective relationships with them. Stephen also talked a lot about the trust matrix, the SMART trust matrix. So we're not going to go into describing that in detail either. But what we did want to talk about is a little bit about the paradigm of maybe a new manager, a new leader who comes into an area. And when that new manager or leader has the paradigm of trust starts with you, they come into an area and they say, trust starts with you. So what does that mean? You need to earn my trust. And Stephen flipped that on its head and he said, an effective leader said, trust starts with me. It's my responsibility to earn your trust as a leader. So if I come in as a low trust leader and say, trust starts with you, what do I do? How do I treat you as an employee if trust starts with you? Does somebody have something, an example you'd like to share? If I come in as a leader and I say trust starts with you, you have to earn my trust. Well, as a supervisor, then I would come in and I would say, if trust starts with you, that means that I need to look over your shoulder and see how productive you're being. I'd like you to report your results to me on a weekly or daily basis. I'm going to be reviewing your statistics all the time because trust starts with you and you have to earn my trust. And so what does that cause me to do then as a supervisor? Micromanage. And all of a sudden my employees are talking behind my back, and maybe they're doing things that aren't very productive because trust starts with them, and I'm a micromanager as a supervisor. Whereas if I come in and I say, trust starts with me, I have to earn your trust, what does that cause me to do as your supervisor? Right away, I'm giving you my trust. I trust you. I'm coming into this new area. I know that the people who are doing the work are the experts at this job. I don't need to look over your shoulder every day. I'm going to touch base with you maybe on a weekly basis to just say, how are things going on the team? Is there any help that I can provide to you as your leader? And then if I'm treating employees that way, what am I going to get? I'm going to get their trust. I'm going to get more trust, more buy-in, higher levels of productivity from people. And if I identify a problem, I'm going to use smart trust and say, does this problem mean that we need more training in our office? Does it mean that we need to adjust some procedures or some workflow? I'm not going to automatically assume that it's because an employee is goofing off or not doing a good job. So again, just the importance of using smart trust as a leader. So Deb is now going to take us to organizational trust.
So organizational trust is a function of the people in the organization and the processes that the organization has in place. So you can have a group of really high functioning employees and they can be doing every single process and following every single rule. But if you have too many rules or burdensome processes, your organization is not going to be as effective or as efficient as it might be. So Stephen this morning talked about some of the higher ranking companies in the country are very innovative. And this comes from trusting employees for failure sometimes. If somebody takes a risk and they fail, they might fail once, but if you let them fail and know it's okay, they might come up with an extremely innovative process or a new product, and it's going to move that organization forward. So if you trust your employees, they're going to be more innovative, more creative, and more engaged. So in this section, I think this is a section that connects with me the most, and the more Susan and I teach this course and the more employees we hear from that have taken the course or during the course itself, their responses always make me more energized working in the court because of how thoughtful they are with this section. I'll have to say that when Susan and I first heard a Franklin Covey presenter give the free half-day session on leading at the speed of trust, I was not sold. Susan was. But I'm more of an analytical person. I have to think about something. I really have to ruminate on it and figure out, okay, this is good, I believe it, but how is it really going to work in the court? So it took me a while for it to sink in. And we even went through one session, we went through one training course, and I liked it, but I didn't love it. And I still didn't get, how is this really going to move our organization forward? So the second time we taught it, we had a group of the Emerging Leaders Network in the room. And there were people from all over, different divisions of the court, different levels. So we had senior court clerks, we had an attorney, we had a staff generalist, we had a supervisor. So they were all different kinds of levels. So they had all different types of experiences. And what really got to me most was this organizational trust section. And it was this slide. We talked about what systems or processes need improvement in your court. And a senior court clerk said, you know, I like what I do, I'm good at what I do, but there's this one process that just drives me crazy. It doesn't make any sense. And when she had asked in the past, why do you do it that way? She was told, well, that's the way we do it. And you could tell it was really bothering her. So we went through the exercise talking about, well, what control do you have to change a process? And some people didn't have much control, or they thought they didn't have much control. So one of the things we did was do a trust action plan with this section, and she used that one process. And her plan was to go back, dig through the process, figure out why it was the way it was, and then present something back to her supervisor about why they should change the process. So we left the class, and a couple weeks later she said, I found out, why we do it the way we do it, And I found out that we don't have to do every step in the process. I presented it to my supervisor, and we changed the process. And she was much more comfortable with it. So I think getting people at all levels of the organization to have some trust that they can ask questions, or a supervisor to say, you know, we've always done it this way, but I have some control over how we process a certain piece of paper, or I have control over how I run a meeting. Maybe it's just that simple. You can run a more effective meeting. It gets people not just blindly following old processes, old procedures. It helps them get more invested in their work because they understand why they're doing something more, and they understand they might be able to change something, or then they might understand, I know exactly why it's done this way. I didn't know all of the information I found out, so now I'm more comfortable doing it this way. So this is the section where I was sold on it. And then I continued to dig more and more into self-trust and relationship trust. And I see how trust breaks down now more than I've ever seen it before. And I see things that I do or don't do that I could do better. And it really helps me now as a human resources manager talk with supervisors more openly, because we all share the same language about, have you ever thought of it this way? Or when you had that conversation, are you sure you were clear with your expectations? And they're more apt to say, you know, I wasn't. Or I can see how this could have broken down. So I think supervisors and managers are taking more responsibility with their piece of building relationships, and with their team and just with their colleagues as well. So now I'm a believer. So looking up at this slide, think of some processes or something going on in your court that might be holding you back, or that might be holding your staff back, or the organization as a whole. And think about what control you have in your position in the court. What could you change? Maybe it's just starting to ask questions. Maybe it's going and talking to your supervisor or manager about why is it the way it is? Has it ever been done differently? What could we try that could maybe improve one of these processes or procedures? So I'd like you to talk at your table about a process that just bugs you like nothing else, and maybe one thing that you could do to try to change it. Or maybe if there's something that you've tried that worked or didn't work, but at least you've tried to dig a little bit into something that really bothers you, that's bringing down your productivity or the credibility of your team maybe. So I'm going to give you some time at your table, because I think this is one where the more you think about it, the more you start seeing how trust and all the 13 behaviors can really start shifting processes in your organization. So you can talk at your tables. Sorry to cut your conversation short, but Susan's going to walk around and just take a few examples of some processes that you might be able to approach.
Does anybody have any ideas you'd like to share with the group? Some aha moments you may have had during Stephen Covey's presentation, or this one on something you may address when you get back?
In the 20th Circuit Court, what was happening was there were commitments to jail, and that was taking the county clerks to prepare at least 8 hours with all the amount of volume of cases they were going through. But the jail cannot hold anybody unless they don't have the actual signatures on the commitment, or release somebody without the commitment papers. So the security staff from the jail, from the sheriff department, taking notes on the commitment order. So if the judge would say sentence for 8 days, credit 7 days, then the person has to be released next day. And there were recording errors sometimes. So what that process had to change, where the sheriff department deputies did not have to take notes, and the clerks, when they enter the order and print it, a copy could print at the jail too.
So you identified a process that wasn't working and was broken, and using straight talk and talking about how can we get better, you made the process better. Wonderful. Thank you. Good example. Does anybody else have an example you'd like to share? No? Oh, I see a hand back here. Wonderful.
we found that new employees orientation really wasn't enough through the HR department. A new employee may spend 6 hours at HR filling out forms, getting information, and they were so overwhelmed with that information, they forgot a lot of it. So when they came to our division, we now have a mentor just for new employees. They can go to this person, they can talk to them about how hard training is, what's happening. The trainer and the mentor will work together in getting them to understand the court culture, maybe the politics of the office, depending on what position they're in. Even as far as COOP procedures, we all have to have at the ready a backpack with all kinds of supplies in it. We were not doing those things for the new employees. They were felt they weren't getting everything that they needed from a trainer who is also very busy because they're on-the-job training. So this is working. It's a work in progress. We're asking our people who we're working with right now to evaluate how we're doing it and what we can do better. But that we found was really lacking once they got to our division, to continue to help them.
Those are great examples. So in this example, it sounds like you started by listening first, identifying what wasn't working with regard to new employee orientation and where new employees needed help. And then you confronted reality and you improved the system. You got better. So those are two great examples. So with regard to the 4th District Court, what we identified and have been working on organizationally, and I mentioned earlier, is we instituted the row work environment. And that slide. So in row, employees are allowed to decide what hours they're going to work from whatever location they need to work from in order to deliver results. So currently we have 56 employees working in a row work environment, and we've got human resources, EOD, a group of psychologists, court psychologists are working in row, and line staff from our juvenile court and also our traffic violations bureau. And really it's the employee's responsibility then, if they're responsible for taking in citations at the counter and payments, it's really their responsibility to decide how many employees do we need staffing the front counter during our core business hours, how are we going to cover each other for vacations, and is there work that we can be doing from home in order to deliver more effective results. And really that all starts with establishing trust in the organization. So we put measurements in place for what our expectations were with regard to customer service. We created transparent job expectations so all of the employees know what they're responsible for. We talk straight when we identify a problem, and we address that problem right away. We don't wait. And we focus on results in the work, not how you're getting the work done, but the results that you're delivering. And as a result, customer service and the quality of our customer service has improved. Employees who were thinking about leaving our court decided to change their mind, even though they haven't had raises for 4 years because of budget cuts. They made the decision that because of Roe, they wanted to stay in the organization, that was worth more to them than money. And it's really increased employee engagement. And that's just one example. We've got some other examples here where we've instituted those kinds of trust results in our organization. So with regard to market trust, we had to do a little changing of the format because the presentation leading at the speed of trust is really focused on private sector, whereas we're public sector. So we changed this a little with the permission of Franklin Covey. So in this model, and I talked about the relationship model earlier with regard to the supervisor coming in, what's a low trust supervisor and a high trust supervisor. When we talk about building a reputation and market trust, a low trust leader's paradigm is we own our reputation as the court. We are the court. We have a reputation where we uphold justice. But a high trust leader takes a step back and says, our court users own our reputation, and that puts the onus on employees really to deliver high-quality customer service regardless of what's going on, regardless if they're taking in fines every day, taking phone calls from our call center, entering cases. If they're owning our reputation, the court users, then we have to deliver high-quality customer service. So it impacts how our employees and our leaders see customer service, how they speak to the customers we serve, and how they behave on a daily basis. We really go through this in depth when we teach the course and have practice sessions that they go through. Another measurement that we put into place is the quality in the court workplace survey that Deb's going to talk about.
So in your packet, there's a sheet that talks about the Quality Court Workplace Survey that our court has done twice, and I believe it's on the agenda to do in 2013. But the survey was developed by the National Center to gather opinions about engagement and satisfaction in the workplace. So I pulled out a couple responses from the survey. This was taken about 4 years ago. So going back to organizational trust, do employees trust the organization that they work for? Do they trust their supervisor? Are they comfortable with the processes? 90.3% of employees agree or strongly agree that they're proud to work in their court. So that when you think back, why is somebody proud to work at an organization? You can look at the survey questions after you leave here today, but a lot of it goes back to trusting your supervisor, trusting that the organization's doing the right thing. And then with market trust, how does our community view the court? Nearly 70% of employees agree or strongly agree that the court is respected in the community. And when you think that most of the community that's coming to court is not coming there on their own free will, or they don't want to be there, that 70% of people thinking that we're respected in the community is really quite high. So I'm glad you have this slide to take away because there's a lot of text here. And if you're really interested in this subject, take one of my business cards or Susan's business cards. And at the bottom of one of our cards is our public website. And if you go to the research page on our public website, you can find a lot more about the fairness studies that I'm going to talk about. So past research shows that satisfaction with the court is more related to the perception of how people were treated than the order that was actually given out. So somebody might lose their case, but they might think it's a fair decision because of the way they were treated. So going back to what Susan was saying about how people speak and behave towards our court customers or our court users, it really goes a long way in how the public perceives us and perceives their sentence or their order or their judgment. If they believe that they were treated fairly, they're much more likely to comply with an order. So I'm going to go through one slide quickly with just some samples of what some of the fairness studies that our research department in Hennepin County found. So on a scale of 1 to 9, where 9 is strongly agree and 1 is strongly disagree, we show that we had some surveys of people that were actually coming out of court. So we had research assistants come and interview domestic abuse litigants, housing court litigants, and court users that had just seen a hearing officer. So right after they came out of court, they were interviewed in family, civil, and criminal. So you can see, is the court perceived as fair to litigants and other constituents? We were ranking up over a 7, where 9 is strongly agree. Do litigants perceive they're listened to? And again, we had very high marks, as well as understanding court orders that they were given and were their cases resolved in a timely manner. So this shows that how the employees of the court treat litigants really goes a long way into involving the public's trust and confidence in the court as an institution. So it goes back to your core values and really getting people to understand how they behave really comes across to the court users. So like Susan said, if you took one of the books this morning, Leading at the Speed of Trust from Stephen Covey, if you read the section about market trust, It's really driven to a for-profit organization. So Susan and I worked with a consultant from Franklin Covey when we were certified to really go through the material and change it to the underlying philosophy that we wanted to get to the 4 cores, but we didn't want to put for-profit examples in because we know from the classes we've taught that it's a big turnoff when you start doing business speak with our court leaders. So we really targeted at the 4 cores. So do court users believe we have integrity? Do they believe we demonstrate good intent? Do we demonstrate credibility, capabilities, and would the customer say we delivered on the results we promised we would? So you have a sheet in your packet again about the 4 cores of credibility. And we're not going to go through this worksheet today, but in our classes we have the leaders go through every one of these questions. And there's some really interesting discussions about where we're doing really well in our court and where we can see room for improvement as well. So much ends up on the news or on the internet nowadays. It's like as soon as a sentence is given in a high-profile case, 4 minutes later, it's all over the internet. So most recently, we had the Amy Sensor case in Minnesota, where she's the wife of a former Minnesota Vikings player, and it was a very contentious case. And there were news reporters all over the courthouse for all of the weeks that the trial went on. So things that happen in the court show up on the news right away. Or if an employee of a public organization does something that's inappropriate, breaks rules, it's all over the internet, all over the news. And then there's a lot of following up with the newspaper, trying to do some image repair for the court. So what we do is really talk to employees about what's the public perception of the court and how they, again, play into the perception of the court and how it's so important. So I wanted to ask you, in your court, what are you doing to increase your public trust and confidence in your institution? What are some things that you might do? Does anybody put out press releases of things that the court is doing or anything like that? Do you take customer feedback? And do you get back to the customers if they've had a bad experience? So I see heads nodding that you do. So that shows that you're listening to the court customers, that you're not just throwing their message in a pile and getting back to them when you can get back to them. Again, it's showing them that they add value, or they have value, and that you need to respond to their concerns. Do you want to give an example of some of the things that your public information officer does?
Internet he maintains by putting news releases or RFPs or the high-profile cases. He provides information to the press and to the public.
So it's being proactive, being transparent.
Yes.
Getting the information out there that people want to know.
We have to have these rules to protect the jurors and stuff, so he wants to make sure that the newspapers and so forth, when all the crime shows come up, they know what the protocol is for the court.
Where are you from?
6th Judicial Circuit, Florida.
Florida? Okay. Thank you. We have one more.
I'm just curious if you or anybody else in the room, how you're dealing with, I think that the balancing act here is now with the blogs and that kind of reaction, not taking, how do you balance not taking that necessarily as valid, some of it is not valid customer kind of feedback, and balancing that with, the credibility and the trust issue with the public. Just curious how people are dealing with that.
Does anybody want to respond to that?
The only reason I bring that up, there was an earlier session this week, on that Justice at Stake and the National Center has done on how courts are valued, and it's going down, the public trust and confidence, as opposed to in past years, as a result of TV programs, as a result of the current political environment, and us being labeled, as we always have been with government. And I think that's something we should start considering when we're crafting whatever this message is going to be out there, to create this public confidence in us. And I know we've tried to do a good job, get out there, and some of the things you're trying to bring up, Deb, about public trust and confidence, but I really think in this environment, and now when I've seen the results of what, they asked questions like, if the court funding is cut, are we really losing value? And most of the public said they don't know or they don't care. And so that's an issue I think all of us have to be really concerned about. So I think this is a good issue, and I would take it to the next level beyond just the customers that are coming in, because their value of our system is a little higher than the other ones out there. I think we have a real audience out there that we have to start crafting a message for.
Well, I know in Minnesota, our state court leadership deals a lot with the legislature and meeting with all of the Senate and the legislatures throughout the year to make sure they understand what value is the court adds, how much fine revenues are brought in, and how much that really contributes to the state's budget. They do talk a lot to law firms, get law firm opinions, and then some of the law firms like the bar associations talk to the legislators as well about if you cut court funding, that means our cases are going to be delayed, and that's not justice served. And again, going back to we're our own branch of government, and we deserve an adequate level of funding. So it's going, like Shelley mentioned, it's going beyond just the court users. It's going to an even higher level to get the message out. And I know in Minnesota, our last budget session, the courts were spared any cuts. We remained stable, which we were very fortunate to remain stable. But again, our court administrators at the state level did such a good job about showing all of the advancements that our court has been doing, showing where our money is going to as far as improvements, and how it's not only helping the court and the court users, but it's also helping with the public defenders, the county attorneys, the other justice partners, with the bar associations. So they really showed that the court has a wide-reaching they get their fingers in a lot of different businesses, and they're very critical for the functioning of the government and the state on a whole.
I think this is a good way to talk about what the courts are doing. We do have a veterans court, a mental health court, a co-parent court, and a DWI court. As Deb mentioned, it's on our website if you want more information about that. But that is another way to reach the community and build trust and confidence with them. So just applications for this as a wrap-up. We do have staff meeting discussions where we regularly use the language about the 13 behaviors in those staff meetings. We provide organizational development coaching to employees in crisis, and we use this training as a part of that coaching. And we include this training as part of our performance management discussions and write goals for employees on their performance reviews using the language from these cards. So we want to thank you for attending our workshop today. We hope we've provided you with tools on how to use leading at the speed of trust in your courts. And if you have any follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to contact Deb or I. Again, our business cards are at the back of the room, and we would love to work with you on figuring out how to use this course in your courts. Thank you.